Meanwhile, China is also playing the insecure partner, snooping on its citizens like no government has done before. Every single action of a Chinese citizen is mapped now. Their online presence, their social media accounts, their comments and their likes. The surveillance is all pervading. We're calling it big data dictatorship. Take a look and you'll feel lucky to be living in India.
It's the next tech superpower. It's embracing new age internet tools. And to everyone's surprise, it's using them against its own people. China is racing to become the first to implement a pervasive system of algorithmic surveillance. What makes it all the more disturbing is that Beijing is said to be detaining innocent people without any concrete evidence against them, because a piece of software suggested to do so. Isn't it scary? Imagine you haven't done anything and you have been put in a custody because some software predicts that you might end up committing a crime against the state. And before you scratch your head and wonder how it's even happening, how is the government predicting dissent, stay with me and understand this new phenomena. Living under constant surveillance of your own government. Did you look at these people? All of them have a good digital life. And quite like them, I also happen to have a fair online presence. I also share and comment on Facebook, watch videos on YouTube, make online searches, do a lot of online shopping, post tweets, make online transactions, and listen to music on streaming services. Which means every time I do an online activity, I leave a digital trace. You might not realize it, but the internet today knows more about you than you probably know about yourself. And these digital traces combined together can tell the full story of who I am. For instance, my tweets show my interest in technology. My Instagram feed is a clear indicator of the foodie in me. My listening experience on the Wink music streaming service tells of my taste in music. And these activities or data such as photos, posts, tweets, comments, voice recordings and emails collectively can paint a comprehensive profile of my online life and can easily sum up my behavioral patterns, which can then be analyzed to figure out my intents or predict my future moves. This is just an example on an individual level. Now, if you compile such comprehensive data of millions of people and structure it in an organized way, it becomes big data. That is large volumes of data that can be analyzed to study behavior and reveal patterns. And there are specialized software that makes the entire process simple and easy. Now, this big data can be used by anyone, from corporations to agencies to institutions and governments. And China's authorities in the far western region of Xinjiang have been reported to be using such data to detain suspects, which are flagged by predictive software. And note, there is no sign of crime here. People are just being identified purely on the basis of data suggested by software. A Human Rights Watch report says some people targeted by the system have been detained or sent to what's called political education centers as part of the region's security campaign. This predictive policing is not only enabling officials to arbitrarily detain people, but it also blatantly violates privacy rights. There, however, has not been any comment on this from China's Ministry of Public Security. But is there smoke without fire? It has also been reported that a similar design of predictive security software is also being rolled out in other regions of China. But surveillance is more intrusive in Xinjiang. Well, before you assume anything, let's understand that big data is not a negative phenomenon. But how it is used is what becomes a matter of concern. For instance, it can be used in positive ways. The same set of large data can be used to predict attacks, catch criminals, and detect frauds. But the use of such data for surveillance in China underscores how the state is policing its population and the citizens' absolute breach of privacy. With Bureau Inputs, Ankit for WION.
And its compulsive micromanagement and surveillance. It goes beyond its borders. In an attempt to extend its sphere of influence, Beijing is now using checkbook diplomacy to gain influence of politicians and businesses around the world. Here's a report.
A strange slogan dominated the election campaign of Samura Kamara in Sierra Leone, the presidential candidate for the ruling All People's Congress. As Kamara made a campaign stop, he was greeted with chants of "We are Chinese" by the people who were gathered there. Sierra Leoneans are voting for their first government in 10 years. But a shadow of the Chinese government looms large over the elections. One of the poorest countries of the world, Sierra Leone is trapped under a mountain of Chinese debt. Beijing has been a close ally of outgoing President Ernest Bai Koroma. But it is not just Sierra Leone. Xi Jinping is spreading his sphere of influence through the Belt and Road Initiative. Several emerging countries who are in dire need of investment now find themselves facing China's debt bondage. Experts fear that through billion-dollar loans, China now holds political leverage over governments around the world and can force borrowers to swap debt for equity to expand its global footprint. Here is how China's debt bondage is playing out around the world. Struggling to make ends meet, Sri Lanka agreed to a debt for equity swap with China, leasing out the Hambantota port. Another Belt and Road country, Djibouti, leased out one of its military bases to China in 2016. There is similar threat of a Chinese land grab in Kenya, where the busy port of Mombasa could be leased out to Beijing. China is going beyond development loans to buy influence in developed countries like the United States, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. Influential Chinese citizens have been caught sponsoring efforts to corrupt politicians, universities, think tanks and businesses through their investments. Bureau Report, WION.
So how much money has China invested and where? The figures are staggering. Take a look.
China spent nearly $37 billion in development aid in 2017. This is besides the huge investments it has made in infrastructure projects in Pakistan, Sri Lanka and other countries. Remember, the 3,000-kilometer China-Pakistan economic corridor alone is valued at $46 billion. It's also building a $6.5 billion nuclear power project in Karachi. China is investing $1.62 billion in the Gwadar port that will provide it easier access to markets in West Asia and Africa. In Sri Lanka, China is investing up to $1 billion to build 3 60-story office towers at the Hambantota port that was built with Chinese help. In all, Chinese investments total $2.8 billion in Sri Lanka in the year 2017. The maximum Chinese development aid in 2007 went to America's one-time communist rival, Cuba. China pumped in nearly $7 billion in aid to Cuba last year. But it was impoverished but mineral-rich Africa which was the biggest gainer. Beijing provided as much as $20 billion in loans to countries such as Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, Nigeria, Tanzania and Ghana in 2017. Africa is China's biggest trading partner, so this was just a case of the Chinese investing where their money is. In 2016, 39% of the total $92.3 billion foreign investment into Africa came from China alone. African governments and companies received up to $94.4 billion in loans from China between the years 2000 to 2015. A fifth of these loans went to Angola, which is the continent's second biggest oil producer after Nigeria. Chinese interests poured $36.1 billion into continent in 2016, accounting for 39% of the US $92.3 billion in total foreign investment. According to one estimate, by 2025, China would have provided Africa with $1 trillion in financing, including investments and loans. China has also expanded its investments in Latin America and the Caribbean. From less than $5 billion, Chinese investment rose to $93.79 billion between 2005 and 2016 in Latin American countries. The region is rich in energy resources and thus a natural attraction for power-hungry China. China spent $18.97 billion in energy sector alone in the region in 2010. 57% of this went to Brazil. Europe and North America have also been recipients of Chinese foreign direct investment. The United States alone received $149.69 billion of Chinese investments between 2005 and 15, while Canada got $45.98 billion. Chinese firms invested up to $218.67 billion in Europe in this period. The United Kingdom received $44.73 billion, Russia $28 billion, and Italy $19.82 billion. China has also spent billions of dollars in Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. The Made in China brand is virtually ruling the world. Bureau Report, WION.
The Chinese presence in Pakistan is ubiquitous, and in places like Gwadar and Balochistan, they're all over the place, laying the infrastructure for the $50 billion economic corridor. They're so ubiquitous that they even run bakeries in Islamabad. Comparatively, the Russians are an oddity in Pakistan. Russia has been on India's side for decades. Many Pakistanis would recall the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace and Friendship signed in August 1971, just 4 months before the war broke out over the secession of East Pakistan. But times are changing. Today, Russia has an honorary consul in Peshawar. Russian language signboards are visible in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Russia's profile is rising in Islamabad, likewise Pakistan's profile in Moscow. So what's going on? More importantly, should India be concerned? The Russia-Pakistan dynamics are born of certain conclusions Moscow has drawn with respect to the situation in Afghanistan. Moscow believes Afghanistan has reached tipping point. The government of President Ashraf Ghani is too weak. The Taliban insurgency continues to spread. Moscow believes it has considerable support. Closely tied to this assessment is Moscow's concern over what it sees as the rising profile of the Islamic State in eastern Afghanistan and in some other parts of the country. This threatens the security of Russia's soft southern border, which comprises the Central Asian states. China and Pakistan reportedly facilitated a dialogue with the Taliban, who have given various assurances, including that they have no ambitions beyond Afghanistan. So we now have Russia, China and Pakistan on the same page on Afghanistan. Last December, remember, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made this revealing statement. He said, and I quote, "You cannot resolve a problem without having every stakeholder on the table. The government of Afghanistan, the Taliban and those who can influence the situation need to sit together and find a political solution." So what does that statement mean? It basically underscores Russia's view that Pakistan is a key player in Afghanistan. The military relationship has taken off from here. In 2014, remember, Russia lifted a 25-year-old arms embargo against Pakistan. The same year, Russia agreed to sell Pakistan RD-93 jet engines for its JF-17 fighters. In 2016, the two countries held their first joint military exercise. In 2017, Russia sold Pakistan 4 Mi-35M attack helicopters. A joint military commission has been established. Russia has assured India in the meantime that it need not be concerned about its military sales to Pakistan. Nikolay Kudashev, Russia's ambassador to India, was quoted as saying, "Our relations with Pakistan in the military sphere are of very minimum nature and are strictly limited to anti-terrorism operations and are not comparable in any way to the scope of our relations with India. Most importantly, our ties with Pakistan cannot be viewed as an attempt to change the regional strategic balance." That should be reassuring. Besides, India continues to be in the market for Russian military hardware, including 4 new stealth frigates, another nuclear submarine, the S-400 ballistic missile defense system, more Mi-17 V4 helicopters, the Make in India Kamov helicopter project, and so on. There's a lot on the table. But India is also buying from the US. It's buying from Israel and France. The Washington-Delhi strategic circuit is buzzing. India may be close to signing key defense agreements with the US, and this could plug India into the US communications and intelligence network in the Pacific. Indian naval ships could soon be docking in Diego Garcia. This is happening at a time when Russia, China and Pakistan are in America's crosshairs. Trump's national security strategy has named Russia and China as competitors. Russia is under American sanctions over Crimea and Syria. China faces a possible trade war, while Pakistan is being hauled over the coals for the first time over terrorism. These three are now taking on the US together. But Moscow and Beijing should also know that they're banking on a state sponsor of terror to address their concerns over terrorism. It is tricky terrain, to say the least. For the moment, let's talk about International Women's Day. It is a day that's celebrated worldwide for women's achievements. From the political to the social, it has been observed since the early 1900s and is now recognized every year on the 8th of March. So let's go back to the beginning. In 1908, 15,000 women marched through New York City demanding shorter hours, better pay and voting rights. The following year, the very first National Women's Day was observed across the United States on the 28th of February. In 1910, the International Conference of Working Women was held in Copenhagen. The idea of an International Women's Day was proposed at this conference, and a year later, International Women's Day was honored in Austria, Denmark, Germany and Switzerland on the 19th of March. But it was in 1917 that women were finally allowed the right to vote. In 1977, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution proclaiming a United Nations Day for Women's Rights. And in 1996, the UN adopted the idea of a different theme for Women's Day every year. In 2011, US President Barack Obama proclaimed the month of March to be Women's History Month. There are many who question the need for an International Women's Day in this day and age, but it is required, some say, because women are still fighting for their rights. The battle may be an old one, but it's far from over.